Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel and Happy New Year. This is the first video of 2021, which is going to be a look back of my favourite books of 2020. I've got 10 here, kind of a varied mix, so that it wasn't too samey to talk through them all. I wanted to start by saying that most of these books I read either at the beginning of the year, so much so that I thought I'd read a lot of them in 2019, but that's just how time's operating at the moment. Or during the summer when I was sunbathing a lot. Aside from those two windows within the year, I've really struggled to sit down and read more than 10 or 20 pages at a time of a book. It's taken me so much longer to get through a book than it normally would. And I wanted to mention it because I have a feeling that lots of you might be experiencing the same thing. Just a complete inability to sit down and fully concentrate on something like that. Like TV, games, I can do that for hours and just wash over me. But sitting down and reading, for some reason, is not something my brain has the capacity for, aside from in very small chunks. And I just wanted to mention it to say that it's all good. Like, I set myself a Goodreads reading challenge to read 60 books this year, and then instantly felt quite stressed out by it and thought to myself, hang on a second, you're making a hobby that's meant to be relaxing stressful, and decided to take the pressure off and just think, I'm just gonna try and be reading at all times, always have a book on the go, even if it takes me a month to get through a book. At the moment, that's fine. I don't know if there's some subconscious thing that is stopping me from doing something that's mindful in that way, in case all of the reality of the world might come crashing down on me. I don't know, but I know a lot of people are feeling this way. So I just wanted to start this video by saying, if you are finding it so hard to sit down and concentrate and read, if you're just doing a tiny bit a week, a chapter a week of a book or whatever, that is better than nothing, and don't put pressure on yourself or take the joy out of something that is meant to be very joyful. That aside, I've got 10 books here, which hopefully might inspire some reading. Maybe when I go through them, I'll try and say how much of an easy read they were or weren't. Most of them kind of aren't an easy read, I'm afraid. But anyway, let's get into it. I've got a mix of fiction and non-fiction. Quite a nice mix here, actually. So let's begin. This is in no particular order. This isn't just from 10 to 1 in terms of my favourites. These are all equally favourite, or let's say. But the first one I've got here is Christodora by Tim Murphy. I honestly had thought that I'd read this in 2019, but my Goodreads said otherwise, so I'm trusting that. This is a novel set in the Christodora building, which is just near Tompkins Square Park in New York. It's set mostly throughout the 80s during the AIDS crisis, and it follows a family who live in the Christodora building, hence the name of the book, and their son, and how they, as parents, grow up through this time in New York, and how it then goes on to affect their son in his adult life. It is quite bleak. It reminded me in some ways of A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, which I know is an immensely popular book. I read that in 2019 and didn't love it, if I'm honest, because just found it too bleak. By the time I got to the end of it, I didn't really know what I was meant to have gotten out of it, except total misery. This has an element of that bleakness. Obviously, the setting of that time in the AIDS crisis was a horrible time, and it goes into a lot of detail about that, a lot of detail about the people affected by it. There's lots of talk about relationships at that time as well, and like I said, how this child's life grows up through that time and how the parents' relationships are affected by it too. So the backdrop's quite bleak, but there are happier breakthrough moments in this book, and I guess also because it's set in New York, it reminds me of A Little Life in some way. What I'm trying to say is that I think if you enjoyed A Little Life, you will really like this book, and I personally much preferred it, just because it wasn't as relentlessly miserable. There were some nicer moments within it. So in fact, it's got a review on it on the back by Hanya Yanagihara. Someone obviously also had this thought that I'm having. But yes, this is Christodora by Tim Murphy, a really lovely book. Next up is A Fine Balance by Rohinton Mystery. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to have favourites within the favourites, but if I had to pick one, it would probably be this book. I read this at the very beginning of the year, and out of all the books I have here, I think this sort of transported me into another world, another time, all of that wonderful things a novel can do, more than any of the others. It's set in the mid-1970s in an undisclosed city in India, and the way that Rohinton Mystery builds that landscape's incredible. Again, it's it's a sad book. It made me cry. It's a very, very, very sad book. And it covers a lot of the history of the time, which I knew very little about, very ignorantly. But just in such kind of, I sort of want to use the word rich in the history that's there, everything that's going on in the landscape and the way it's described, but more than anything in the characters. The characters in this book are just amazing. It follows the life of Dina, who I would kind of say is the main character possibly, and she and her husband live in again a city it's never named in India, and I don't want to say what happens too much, but through a turn of events she ends up living with two new housemates, shall we say, and it three at certain points. So most of there's three of them actually. Two of them are tailors and one of them is a student, and it kind of follows their life over it's all over the decade. I think it begins at the early 70s, 1975, and I think it ends in the 80s. Oh yeah, 1984. So it goes over a whole decade of their lives, and it's just beautiful. Nothing I can say about it will even begin to do it justice, but it, like I said, more than any other book I read this year, was just, the sadness in it, again, unlike A Little Life where I read it and thought, I don't know what I was meant to get out of that. The sadness of the stories in this book is, it doesn't feel pointless, it doesn't feel gratuitous, it feels like it's telling a story from a part of history and a part of the world where they use the characters to illustrate so many of the bigger contextual things happening at the time, which is what I really enjoyed about it. And I can't recommend this more. I have another one of his on my shelf to read, which I think is called Such a Long Journey, which I might try to read actually next because of how much I enjoyed this one. So that was number 2. What here we've got, this was a one I really enjoyed of short stories. I thought to have a short story one in here would be quite nice, which is How Long Until Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. N.K. Jemisin wrote the Broken Earth trilogy, the 5th season's the first one, which I read Christmas 2019 and really, really enjoyed, and they're kind of fantasy sci-fi novels. These are all short stories. This question, how long till Black Future Month, isn't answered within the book, which kind of I thought was possibly misleading as what I was expecting to get from it. But the question is answered in a more indirect way in that it has a piece at the beginning where Jemisin is talking about, as a black author, how she always was learning to write while taking her blackness out of it. She never would put black characters in necessarily because she just thought it wouldn't sell in the same way. And then did a course where she was learning how to do short stories just for the challenge of writing in that way. And through that got a whole different insight of how she could write in black characters or her own experience as a black woman into her stories. And so that's the thread that runs throughout these short stories, which is why it's called How Long Till Black Future Month. And kind of, I guess, is her own personal journey of not having to diminish her own blackness or her own culture in her writing whatsoever. It has some which are really futuristic. Some of it reminded me kind of Black Mirror in the way that she writes. There's certain stories in it which I say like Black Mirror in the way it'd be like one of them's like a utopian story actually, where you're only slightly moved from reality. There's only a few changes that would need to happen, and it's quite focused on technology, which obviously is something we feel like we could always get to because of how quickly that develops. I really, really, really enjoyed it. I enjoyed all the stories in it actually, and they're really, really varied as well. So I think there'd be some personally you might not enjoy as much, but there's others that would definitely speak to everybody in a different way, depending on what kind of fiction you normally enjoy to read. So this I absolutely loved, and also, I don't think I did a video like this for 2019, but the Broken Earth trilogy is amazing as well. Next up we have I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. This one I read really recently, and it's also a film on Netflix, which I watched the first 10 minutes of and then had to turn off because I enjoyed the book so much and I felt like the film was going to ruin it for me. I loved this book. I read this so quickly and recently. This is one of the only ones I've really gotten into recently. It's not a super long one or anything, but it's kind of like a horror. But it's definitely a horror. It's got lots of suspenseful moments. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. The story is this girl and her boyfriend are going to her boyfriend's parents' house for dinner. She's meeting her boyfriend's parents for the first time. And the whole time she's asking herself, should she end their relationship? Hence the title, I'm Thinking of Ending Things. And it's kind of talking about their relationship while having her own inner monologue of wondering, is this what I want? Why do I feel this way? Blah, blah, blah. It is, the way it builds up the suspense in certain scenes. I was literally reading it like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, just wanting to know what happened next, but also being frightened of it the whole time. And the ending was brilliant. Lots of people messaged me after I talked about this on Instagram saying that they'd watched the film and it's just really super confusing. I think the book might be a bit easier to grasp. It did make me go, at first, and then I stepped back from it and had to think about it, and the penny dropped and I was like, oh, that was clever. Really, really, really enjoyed this. That might be quite a good one if you're struggling to read, to get back into something that is a real page turner. Okay, next up I have something quite different, which is The Magic of Handwriting. I bought this as a coffee table book from a lovely art shop and then ended up reading it from cover to cover, which isn't something I would normally do with a coffee table book, but it was just fascinating. It is a collection of pieces of handwriting from famous people, people of note, and the collection's from a man called Pedro Correa, who has dedicated his life, basically, it tells you a bit about his history, dedicated his life to collecting pieces of handwriting, whether it be letters, doodles, all kinds of different things. And it all sort of stemmed from him first getting an autograph and then kind of feeling how special that was. And the Morgan Library and Museum in New York did a big exhibition about his collection, and this book is a curation of sort of the most special pieces within his personal collection. It's split into sections: art, history, literature, science, music, philosophy, exploration and conquest, and entertainment. So if you just open to a random page, this is a storyboard from René Magritte. This is a letter from Henry VIII to Francis I of France about negotiations for peace with Emperor Charles V. So it's just amazing. So you get a sample here. I mean, that I couldn't even be able to begin to read that. And then it has the translation and also a bit of history around it. The translation on the other page. There is just amazing, so many amazing pieces in it. Just trying to turn to another page. Benjamin Franklin, the American statesman and innovator, highlights General Washington's international reputation as a military leader. What have we got here? Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, the key leaders of the Cuban Revolution, celebrate victory in the days after the fall of Batista. Sir Isaac Newton, the man who watched the apple drop, compiles a family tree. Amazing. Einstein offers a harsh assessment of psychoanalysis. Let's just do one more. There's so many good things. Karl Marx, a multilingual Marx, jokes with a British positivist. That's a really hard word to say. I really, really, really enjoyed it. It was so many bits that I read and then went on to Google to try and find out more about it because it was so interesting. And I just wanted to include it in here because it's also a beautiful coffee table book and something a little bit different. So that was that. Okay, next up we have I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. I bought this in Paris at the very beginning of the year from Shakespeare and Company, where you get this lovely stamp, which is such a treat. I was just having to familiarise myself with the blurb because it's a very short book and I don't want to ruin anything, so I'm only going to kind of tell you what's on the blurb, which doesn't really do justice at all to what happens in the book. But the premise of it, that there's 39 women living underground, imprisoned in a cage, and they have no concept of time, no concept of what's happened, no concept of what's going on in the world. And that's all I'm going to say about it. It is a dystopian novel, and I read it and it didn't impact me that much when I read it, but it's one of those books that I've thought about really consistently the whole time, so definitely was way more impactful than I realised on finishing it. It's incredible. And I wish I could say more, but any more that I say will ruin what happens. But this is, it was just, no, I can't say more. No, the story is amazing, and there's an element of it. There's one of the newest girl who's underground with them. She kind of becomes the main character, and there is an element in it of something that she realises personally that sets the pace of this book, and that was the thing that I enjoyed the most, and it's kind of like the most consistent thread. I can't say any more without ruining it, but that book I absolutely loved. Next up here, this is one of the ones that I read over the summer, which is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. I absolutely loved this book. This follows the story of Pecola Breedlove, who is a young girl living in Ohio. I was just checking I was going to get that state right. In post-Depression America, so America in the 1940s. And it's called The Bluest Eye because her dream is that she will wake up one morning and have blue eyes. And it's kind of, I can't remember what age she is meant to be exactly, but she's definitely a child. And she believes that when she has these blue eyes, obviously it's representing her not being a young black girl at America in that time, and that she will be like all of the white girls at school, and what that will mean for her and what that means for her prospects and her happiness, and just everything she believes will be better when she has that, and that is her prayer every single night. And it tells you that story alongside telling you what's happening in their family as a whole, what's happening to her personally. It's a really sad book, but beautifully written, and definitely was one of my highlights of the summer reading this book. And again, all the ones I'm talking about here are ones that I still think about often, and this is definitely in that category. Last three, definitely within that category, is Zadie Smith Intimations. Couldn't do this without talking about this book. I know I talked about this a lot in my last video because I included it in the box that I worked on with Reposed, but this is again a series of short essays. It's not fiction like the N.K. Jemisin one, essays by Zadie Smith. There was one in particular called Suffering Like Mel Gibson that I think about every single day in some capacity. Whenever I'm having conversations with people about coronavirus, what's happening in the world, what we've all been through, I always have to reference this essay in some way, because nothing has summed up what 2020 was, what the pandemic was, better than the essays in this book, specifically Suffering Like Mel Gibson. I'm not going to say any more about it because I've spoken about this book a lot on my channel and made a video around that particular essay as well, but obviously it had to be included in this. And on to the last two. Secret History by Donna Tartt. I loved this book. This I had had on my shelf for ages and kept not reading it, and then finally did. And it was one of those where I thought, why have I taken so long to read this book? I haven't read The Goldfinch by her, but I really want to. This is set in New England, and it is following a group of young academics who, the genre is dark academia, and after reading this I spent a long time googling other dark academia books that might be similar. Haven't found any that come close. If anyone's got a recommendation of a book similar to this, let me know, because as a genre I definitely enjoy that so much. So it follows, the story starts with you realise that one of the boys in this friend group is dead, and the friends are involved in it in some way. That's sort of the opening of the book, them realising that there's a body here that they've got to deal with, and then it backtracks and you find out what happened basically. And I absolutely loved it. The characters were incredible, the way the scenes were set were incredible. Like I said, the whole dark academic vibe I absolutely loved. I do really enjoy reading about things which are sort of rooted in education. That, like I said, they're at university in this, they're studying the classics, and there's just something that is really, I don't know what the word is that I'm trying to find, but just almost whimsical to me, of the whole idea of being back at university and learning and all the thinking that comes from around that. I guess it's something that I miss a lot, and something that once you sort of leave education, you don't necessarily ever go back to living your life around learning in that way. So I think I enjoy books that are set back there. And yeah, this I absolutely loved. The Goldfinch, I believe, is meant to be quite different, but I know it's also really popular, so I must read that. Maybe I'm allowed to order that and the other Toni Morrison book, and no others at the moment. And I'm just going to end briefly on this one, Love and Other Thought Experiments by Sophie Ward. This book blew my mind. There was a certain chapter in it I had to read more than once, because the first time I read it I was just like, what? And then slowly, as like all the pieces fit together in my mind, I was just mind blown by the whole thing. So it's kind of semi-philosophical, this book. Each of the chapters opens with a quote from a different philosopher. And the story is about a couple, Rachel and Eliza. And Rachel wakes up one morning and an ant has crawled through her eye, into her eye, and is burrowed in her brain. And she has this conversation with her partner saying, there's an ant living inside my brain. And Eliza is a scientist, and so kind of is thinking, how is that so? And makes the decision to believe Rachel. And in that moment, she's also kind of deciding, well, if I'm making the decision to believe this nonsense as she sees it, then I'm making the decision to fully devote myself to my partner, and it's a really like symbolic leap into their relationship, of which at that point Eliza was having some doubts about. That's the beginning of the book. Even that is a lot, and that's just the beginning. And then you go on to see a whole new world that the ant inside the brain represents. And it's incredible and goes in a direction you will not be able to guess ever. If anyone who hasn't read this book guesses how this book goes, I will give you some sort of prize. I'll give you this book because I would never have guessed for it to go where it went, and I really, really, really loved it, really enjoyed it. And it's not, I think I made it sound like quite a heavy read, but I didn't find it that heavy at all. It was just, you just have to think at certain points, which at the moment is quite hard to do, so if you can't think, then it's not the one for now. So that was, I can't speak, that was my 10 favourite books of last year. I'm hoping to read 60 books this year. As things are going, it's absolutely not going to happen, but it's good to aim high, I guess, isn't it? If anyone has any other recommendations, I mean, I'm sure you all do, but that are similar to any that I have mentioned here, or have read any of them and have your own thoughts, please leave them in the comments. On Goodreads, I'm Elizabeth Hadfield, not Lizzie, it's my full name, Elizabeth Hadfield. So you can go find me on there as well and watch me not reach my goal of 60 books in 2021. And yeah, I hope you have enjoyed it. Like I said, don't be harsh on yourself if you're finding it hard to read. You are not alone at the moment. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.